In a grand palace, the king, desperate for an heir, anxiously waits for news. His 3 wives, hoping to bear him a son, prepare to eat from the priest's potion, an ancient brew that will reveal the mother of the king's true heir. But as the youngest wife walks in, she discovers the stew is gone, eaten by the 2 senior wives, who secretly conspired to keep it from her. Heartbroken, she scrapes the pot with her fingers, praying that somehow she can still conceive the king's son. What happens next will change the fate of the entire kingdom. In a distant village, a king ruled over a peaceful kingdom, but his heart was burdened with sorrow. Despite being married to 3 wives, he had no children, and the greatest fear that weighed on him was the lack of an heir to succeed him on the throne. The king grew older with each passing day, and he knew that without a son, the future of his kingdom was uncertain. His wives, though loyal, had not borne him a male child, and the king could see no way to ensure the continuation of his bloodline. In his desperation, the king turned to the Ifa priest, a revered spiritual figure known for his ability to communicate with the gods. The king believed the priest could offer a solution, one that might finally grant him the son he so desperately needed. The priest arrived at the palace, his presence commanding respect as he performed his sacred rituals. After consulting the oracle, the priest spoke to the king with solemn certainty. The oracle foretold that the king would indeed have a son, but the identity of the mother remained a mystery. The oracle also instructed that the king's wives must all eat from a special potion, which the priest would prepare. This potion would ensure that one of them would conceive the king's heir. Relieved and hopeful, the king agreed to the priest's plan. He believed that with the potion, he would finally have the son he had longed for. As the priest left the palace to prepare the potion, the king eagerly awaited the fulfillment of the prophecy. Little did he know that the actions of his wives would soon set in motion events that would change the fate of his kingdom. The king spent many sleepless nights pondering the outcome of the plan. His mind raced with thoughts of the future, imagining his son sitting on the throne, carrying forward the kingdom's legacy. But with each passing day, a growing sense of uncertainty began to stir within him. What if the prophecy did not come true? What if the gods were silent in their favor? He could not bear to think of a future without an heir, and the pressure mounted on his heart. The Ifa priest returned to the palace with a pot of stew, a mixture that carried the magical potion meant to grant the king his heir. He instructed that each of the 3 wives should eat from the stew, for only then would the gods choose which of them would bear the king's son. However, the 2 senior wives, driven by jealousy and greed, decided to act on their own. They feared that the youngest wife might bear the king's son and take their place. In their minds, this was unacceptable. The senior wives secretly decided to keep the pot of stew for themselves, believing that if they ate all of it, they would ensure that the youngest wife would not have the chance to conceive. They ignored the instructions of the priest, determined to secure the throne for their own children. When the youngest wife discovered that the stew had been eaten and there was nothing left for her, she felt a deep sorrow. She realized that she had lost the opportunity to bear the king's heir. Devastated, she sat alone in her chambers, her dreams shattered. But despite her despair, she refused to give up. She scraped the empty pot with her fingers, desperate to taste even the smallest trace of the stew. She licked the last remnants, hoping that somehow, against all odds, she would still bear a child for the king. Little did she know that her actions, fueled by desperation, would set in motion a surprising turn of events. Days passed, and the two senior wives grew confident that their plan had worked. They eagerly anticipated the arrival of their children, convinced that the king's heir would come from their wombs. But they had no idea that the youngest wife, who had been denied the potion, was still carrying the king's son. The magical stew, though taken away from her, had already worked its magic, and soon her pregnancy would become undeniable. The jealousy and deceit that had filled the hearts of the two senior wives would come back to haunt them. As time moved forward, the tension in the palace grew. Would the youngest wife bear the king's son, despite being denied the stew? Or would the senior wives be the ones to fulfill the prophecy? Their actions, driven by selfishness and fear, would soon be revealed for what they truly were, and the consequences would be dire. Months passed, and the two senior wives began to show signs of pregnancy. Their bellies grew, and they celebrated privately, confident that the king's longed-for son would soon be born. With each passing day, they counted the days until their pregnancies would culminate in the birth of the heir they had worked so hard to secure. Both of them believed that their actions had been enough to guarantee success. They had consumed the stew, and they were certain that the king's son would come from their wombs. But as the weeks wore on, a surprising change began to occur. To the astonishment of the two senior wives, the youngest wife, too, began to show signs of pregnancy. At first, they dismissed it as coincidence, as nothing more than a mistake. After all, they were the ones who had consumed the stew, not her. But as the days passed and her belly grew, their suspicion turned to dread. Could it be that despite their schemes, the youngest wife was still going to bear the king's son? The two senior wives could hardly contain their concern. They began to watch the youngest wife closely, fearful that their plans would be undone. The tension in the palace grew thick as all three wives carried their pregnancies to full term. The senior wives, eager for the birth of the king's heir, began to question if their time had come. Would the youngest wife, who they believed had been denied the potion, prove them wrong? Could she truly be the one to bear the king's son? As the time for childbirth drew near, the two senior wives delivered their babies first. Their hopes were high, and they eagerly awaited the results. But to their dismay, they both gave birth to daughters. The joy they had hoped for quickly turned into quiet disappointment. The king, who had eagerly awaited the birth of his son, was now filled with frustration. His hopes were dashed once again, and the prospect of having no male heir loomed over him like a dark cloud. When the youngest wife went into labor, the two senior wives grew anxious, fearing that she might finally give birth to the son they so desperately desired. The palace was filled with anticipation as the moment of truth arrived. The future of the kingdom seemed to hinge on the outcome of this birth. Could it be that the youngest wife would fulfill the prophecy? Or would she, too, give birth to a daughter, ensuring that the throne would pass to another line? The time for the youngest wife's delivery came, and the palace was filled with tension. The two senior wives waited anxiously, certain that the moment had finally arrived when their victory would be secured. The midwives gathered, and the room was prepared for the birth. The senior wives looked on, eagerly awaiting the arrival of the child, praying that it would not be a son. When the youngest wife finally gave birth, the room fell silent. What should have been a joyful moment turned into one of horror. Instead of a baby, there lay a stone, cold and lifeless, wrapped in cotton cloth. The midwives gasped in disbelief, unable to understand what had happened. The two senior wives cried out in shock, calling for help. The king was immediately summoned, and upon seeing the stone, his face fell. He was consumed by anger and disappointment. His hopes for an heir had been dashed once again, and now the youngest wife had given him nothing but a cruel twist of fate. The king, in his fury, ordered that the youngest wife be cast out of the palace. The villagers, hearing of her disgrace, turned their backs on her. She was left alone, exiled, and abandoned by everyone. The stone baby was taken by the midwives, and the youngest wife, heartbroken and rejected, wandered into the wilderness, carrying the stone with her. She knew that her life would never be the same again. The future of the kingdom was uncertain, and she was left to wonder if she had been cursed by the gods. The weight of the stone in her arms felt heavy, but she held on to it nonetheless, unable to let go of the child she had hoped to give birth to. Days turned to weeks, and the youngest wife wandered aimlessly through the forest, still clutching the stone. Her journey seemed endless, and the isolation began to take its toll on her spirit. She knew she had been wronged, yet there was nothing she could do to reverse the cruel fate that had befallen her. All that remained was the stone, the symbol of her failure, and a distant hope that something could change. But deep in her heart, she held on to the belief that there was still a chance for her child. Perhaps the stone was more than it seemed. Perhaps it had some hidden purpose, some secret, waiting to be revealed. As she ventured deeper into the forest, she was unaware that the stone she carried would soon begin a transformation that would alter the fate of the kingdom forever. Days turned into weeks, and the youngest wife, now an outcast, roamed through the forest. With nothing but the stone in her arms, she wandered aimlessly, unsure of where to go or what to do. She had lost everything: her place in the palace, her dignity, and the chance to fulfill the king's greatest wish. Abandoned and hopeless, she clung to the stone, the strange artifact that had been left in her arms in place of a child. But despite her overwhelming grief, she continued on, determined to somehow make sense of the tragedy that had befallen her. One day, as she wandered deeper into the forest, she came upon a medicine man, known for his knowledge of herbs, healing, and spiritual wisdom. The medicine man lived far from the village, away from the hustle and bustle of the world. His home, hidden in a secluded part of the forest, was a humble dwelling, built using the materials he gathered from the land. The man was well respected in the region, known for his ability to heal both the body and the spirit. The youngest wife approached the medicine man, exhausted from her journey. She explained her misfortune, how she had been cast out of the palace, and how the stone had replaced her baby. The medicine man, compassionate but curious, listened to her story with empathy. He took the stone in his hands, examining it with interest. His eyes widened as he noticed something extraordinary. As the stone sat in his palm, it began to warm, softening with an almost mystical glow. The stone, once cold and lifeless, seemed to come to life in his hands. The medicine man was stunned by this sudden change. His experience with herbs and potions had never prepared him for such an occurrence. He had seen many strange things in his years, but this was beyond anything he had encountered. With great care, the medicine man wrapped the stone in a piece of cloth and placed it near a fire to keep it warm. After a few days, the stone had transformed. Where once there had been a cold rock, there was now a living, breathing baby boy. He could hardly believe what had happened. The boy, though small and frail, was alive and well. He cried, reaching out his tiny hands for the warmth of his caretaker. The medicine man, astonished by the miracle he had just witnessed, vowed to care for the boy as his own. He would raise the child in the ways of nature, teaching him the healing arts and the wisdom of the forest. The boy grew strong under the medicine man's care, unaware of his royal lineage or of the kingdom that awaited him. As the years passed, the boy grew into a young man, wise beyond his years. His deep connection to nature and his ability to heal became well known, but the mystery of his true identity remained hidden. The forest had become his home, and the medicine man had become his father. Little did the boy know he was destined to change the course of the kingdom, and the truth of his birth would one day be revealed. The years went by, and the king grew older. His once mighty reign, which had brought prosperity to the kingdom, now seemed to be drawing to a close. The king's health began to decline steadily, and the people of the kingdom knew that his days were numbered. Despite his many years of ruling and guiding his kingdom with wisdom, the king had been unable to fulfill his greatest desire, to have a male heir to take his place. The people of the kingdom began to worry about the future. The king had failed to produce a son, and without an heir, the fate of the kingdom seemed uncertain. The council of elders, the wise men who helped govern the land, convened to discuss the future. They knew that the king's death would leave the kingdom vulnerable. Without a clear successor, the kingdom could fall into disarray. As the king's health deteriorated, the villagers started whispering about the future of the kingdom. Who would step in to lead? Would the kingdom fall into chaos after the king's passing? The elders, desperate for guidance, called upon the Ifa priest, the oracle whom they trusted to provide divine insight. The Ifa priest once again consulted the oracle. The priest's solemn expression revealed the seriousness of the matter. The oracle spoke of a lost heir, a son who had been born but had been hidden away for years, raised far from the palace. The priest revealed that the king's true heir resided deep in the forest, where he had been raised by a powerful medicine man. The oracle gave the village elders hope. They now had a path to follow. The lost heir, hidden from the world, was alive and ready to assume the throne. The elders sent a group of trusted villagers to find the boy and bring him back to the kingdom. The journey would not be easy, and they feared that time was running out. As they set out to find the boy, they knew that the future of the kingdom rested on their success. The village, once filled with fear and uncertainty, now buzzed with the possibility of a new beginning. Could this mysterious boy, raised in the forest, be the savior the kingdom needed? The elders prayed that they would find the rightful heir and restore peace to the land. But for now, the village held its breath, waiting for the arrival of the one who would inherit the throne and bring stability to the kingdom once more. The lost heir, unaware of his royal bloodline, returned to the village with the villagers. The people of the village marveled at his presence, but questions swirled around his origins. The oracle had said that the boy's mother lived in the village, but no one could identify who she might be. Every woman in the village claimed the boy as her son, each hoping to be revealed as the true mother. The mystery of the boy's parentage remained unsolved, and the villagers were unsure how to proceed. The Ifa priest, once again called upon, declared that the boy must taste from every pot of stew that the women of the village would prepare. The stew would reveal his true mother. Each woman in the village prepared her finest stew, hoping to catch the boy's attention. The boy tasted the stews one by one, each one more flavorful than the last. He felt overwhelmed by the variety of aromas, and as the day passed, his senses became dull. The villagers, waiting with bated breath, wondered how the boy would respond when he reached the last pot. The outcast woman, who had been shunned by the village for years, sat quietly at the end of the line. She had no money to purchase extravagant ingredients. Her pot contained only the simple vegetables she had gathered from the forest, what little she could afford. Yet she had prepared it with care. When the boy finally reached her pot, he was weary, yet as soon as he tasted it, he felt a strange sense of recognition. It was not the richness of the stew that caught his attention, but its simplicity. The flavors reminded him of something familiar, something comforting, something that seemed to stir a long-forgotten memory. The stew had no complex spices, no lavish additions. It was humble, but it was made with love and care. As the boy tasted the last spoonful, a realization flooded him. The warmth in his chest grew, and without thinking, he stood up, calling out with certainty, "This is my mother." His words rang out through the village, and the crowd fell silent. The truth was finally revealed. The woman, who had been ostracized for so long, was indeed the boy's true mother. The two senior wives, whose deception had been exposed, were banished from the village. The boy, now confirmed as the rightful heir, ascended to the throne, with his mother by his side. The kingdom was restored to peace and prosperity as the lost heir began his reign, forever indebted to the woman who had raised him. The outcast, once a mere shadow in the village, was now celebrated. She was honored for her resilience, for the sacrifices she had made, and for the son she had raised in secret. The boy ascended to the throne as the rightful heir, and his reign marked the beginning of a new era. Under his just rule, the kingdom flourished, and the outcast mother stood proudly by his side, finally recognized for the strength and love she had always carried within her. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Don't miss out on more incredible tales. Subscribe now and join our growing community.